What if I told you that imperial collapse isn't chaos? That it's actually predictable? A seven-stage sequence that has played out 3 times in the last 500 years with mathematical precision. And what if I told you that the United States has already completed 5 of those 7 stages? Not starting them, completed them. This isn't prophecy. This is pattern recognition. And the pattern has a perfect record. 3 empires, 3 collapses. The exact same sequence every single time. Spain took 80 years to go from global hegemon to irrelevant. Britain took 40 years. The Soviet Union took less than a decade. The United States is currently in stage 5. And if history is any guide, we don't have much time left. The 7-stage collapse pattern isn't a theory. It's an observation, a framework identified by studying every major imperial collapse since 1500. And it works because empires, despite their differences, all face the same fundamental problem. They become victims of their own success. Here's how the pattern works. Stage 1, the Golden Age. The empire reaches peak power. Military dominance, economic strength, currency supremacy. Everyone wants to be them, trade with them, align with them. This is the moment of maximum confidence. Stage 2, imperial overreach. Success breeds ambition. The empire expands beyond sustainable limits. More territories, more commitments, more promises. Military bases multiply. Defense budgets balloon. The costs begin to exceed the benefits, but nobody notices because the system still works. Stage 3, currency debasement. The bills come due, but the empire can't pay them through taxes alone. So they manipulate the currency. Reduce precious metal content. Print more money. Expand the money supply. At first, it seems like a solution. Free money to fund the empire. But it's actually the beginning of the end. Stage 4, debt spiral. Currency manipulation isn't enough. The empire starts borrowing. First from domestic sources, then from foreign creditors. The debt grows faster than the economy. Interest payments consume more of the budget. They borrow to pay interest on previous borrowing. The mathematics become unsustainable. Stage 5, loss of productive capacity. This is where it gets lethal. The real economy starts shrinking. Manufacturing moves elsewhere. The best talent leaves. Investment flows abroad. The empire is no longer creating wealth. It's consuming wealth created by others. They import everything and produce less and less. Stage 6, geopolitical fragmentation. Allies start hedging. Enemies test boundaries. The empire's currency, once demanded globally, begins losing reserve status. Trade partners create alternative systems. The military, spread across the world, can no longer project power effectively. Promises made can no longer be kept. Stage 7, systemic collapse. The center cannot hold. The currency fails. The debt becomes unpayable. The empire fragments or collapses into a shadow of its former self. It happens faster than anyone expects because the previous 6 stages created compounding instabilities that all cascade simultaneously. That's the pattern. 7 stages. And it has a perfect track record. Let me show you exactly how it played out 3 times before. Starting with the original blueprint. Spain, 1500 to 1640. The first global empire. The first to follow the pattern to completion. Stage 1 happened fast. After 1492, Spanish conquistadors seized the richest gold and silver mines in human history. The Potosi mine in modern-day Bolivia alone produced 45,000 tons of silver between 1556 and 1783. At the peak in the 1590s, Spanish galleons were bringing home 400 tons of silver annually. The Spanish real was the global reserve currency. Spain controlled the money supply of Europe. King Philip II inherited this empire in 1556. More wealth than any ruler in history. And he spent it all. Stage 2, imperial overreach. Philip fought wars simultaneously on 4 continents. Against the Ottoman Empire in the Mediterranean. Against France and Italy. Against Protestant rebels in the Netherlands for 80 years straight. Against England's navy, including the disastrous Spanish Armada in 1588. Wars in the Philippines. Wars throughout the Americas. By 1580, Spain had military commitments spanning the entire known world. The cost was beyond comprehension. In 1571, the Battle of Lepanto alone required mobilizing over 200 ships and 84,000 men. The ongoing Netherlands war cost 3.5 million ducats per year, roughly 50% of Spain's entire annual revenue. But Philip believed Spanish silver made him invincible. He was wrong. Stage 3. Currency debasement. By the 1590s, Spain couldn't pay its bills with taxes or even with all that New World silver. So they did what failing empires always do. They debased the currency. Spanish silver coins began at 93% purity. By 1566, they reduced it to 67%. By 1597, to 50%. By 1602, Spanish coins were 75% copper. The face value stayed the same. 1 real equaled 1 real. But the actual silver content had been reduced by over 80%. Merchants weren't stupid. They stopped accepting debased coins at face value. Inflation exploded. Prices in Spain quadrupled between 1500 and 1600. The purchasing power of Spanish currency collapsed even while silver flowed in from the Americas. Stage 4. Debt spiral. Currency debasement wasn't enough. Spain borrowed constantly. From Italian bankers, the Fuggers in Germany, anyone who would lend. And then they defaulted. 1557. First bankruptcy. Spain suspended payments on all debts. 1560. Second bankruptcy. Restructured and kept borrowing. 1575. Third bankruptcy. The interest payments alone exceeded new revenue. 1596. Fourth bankruptcy under Philip II. 1607. Fifth bankruptcy under Philip III. 1627. Sixth bankruptcy under Philip IV. 6 complete sovereign defaults in 70 years. Each time, they promised reforms. Each time, they went right back to borrowing and spending. Because the empire couldn't sustain itself without debt. Stage 5. Loss of productive capacity. Here's what destroyed Spain. They had all the gold and silver in the world, and it made them lazy. Why build industries when you can buy everything with silver? Spanish manufacturing collapsed. Textiles, weapons, ships, everything was imported. By 1600, Spain was importing even basic goods from France, England, and the Netherlands. The silver flowed in from the Americas and flowed right back out to pay for imports. Spain became a conduit for wealth, not a creator of it. They were consuming more than they produced, sustained only by plundering the New World. And the silver mines didn't last forever. Production peaked around 1600 and began a long decline. The empire's economic foundation was temporary, and they had built nothing to replace it. Stage 6. Geopolitical fragmentation. By 1620, Spain's position was unraveling. The Netherlands was winning its independence war. England had defeated the Armada and was building its own empire. France was becoming the dominant European power. Spain's currency, once accepted everywhere, was increasingly rejected. Silver coins were tested, weighed, and discounted. The Spanish military, once feared, suffered defeats across Europe. At the Battle of Rocroi in 1643, Spain's legendary tercios were destroyed by France. It was the end of Spanish military supremacy. Stage 7. Systemic collapse. Spain didn't fall overnight. It declined across decades. But by 1640, the collapse was undeniable. Portugal rebelled and regained independence. Catalonia revolted. The economic system was broken, the military overstretched, the currency debased into irrelevance. Spain went from the world's dominant superpower in 1550 to a second-rate power by 1650. They remained a country, but the empire was finished. They never recovered. That's the pattern. Completed. Now watch it happen again, faster. Britain, 1914 to 1956. The largest empire in human history. Same pattern. Faster timeline. Stage 1. The Golden Age. In 1914, Britain ruled 412 million people, nearly a quarter of the world's population. The sun never set on British territory. The pound sterling was the global reserve currency, backed by gold, accepted everywhere. The Royal Navy ruled the seas. London was the financial capital of the world. This was peak empire. And it was about to make the same mistakes Spain made 300 years earlier. Stage 2. Imperial overreach. World War I changed everything. Britain entered the war in 1914 to maintain the balance of power in Europe. They ended up fighting a 4-year industrial war that cost 850,000 British lives and £35 billion, roughly 140% of their pre-war GDP. But they won, and victory brought even more commitments. New mandates in the Middle East. Iraq, Palestine, Jordan. Expanded presence in Africa. Obligations to defend Poland and France. By 1920, Britain had more territory and more military commitments than ever before, with an economy shattered by war. Stage 3. Currency debasement. Before World War I, the British pound was backed by gold. 1 pound equaled 113 grains of pure gold. Fixed. Immutable. During the war, Britain suspended the gold standard to print money. By 1919, the money supply had increased by 111%. The pound had lost 61% of its purchasing power. Inflation had destroyed the savings of an entire generation. Britain tried to return to the gold standard in 1925 at pre-war parity. It was a disaster. The pound was overvalued. British exports became uncompetitive. Unemployment soared. In 1931, they abandoned gold permanently. The pound became a fiat currency, its value determined not by gold reserves, but by government decree. The debasement was complete. Stage 4. Debt spiral. World War I created debts Britain could never repay. They borrowed £1.4 billion from the United States. War bonds to domestic citizens totaled billions more. By 1920, Britain's national debt was 136% of GDP, up from 26% in 1914. Then came World War II, another existential war. More borrowing. By 1945, Britain's debt reached 259% of GDP. Interest payments alone consumed 40% of government revenue. They were borrowing to pay interest on previous borrowing. The mathematics were terminal. Stage 5. Loss of productive capacity. This is where Britain's collapse became inevitable. The empire was no longer the workshop of the world. In 1870, Britain produced 32% of global manufacturing output. By 1913, it was 14%. By 1950, it was 9%. Manufacturing had moved to the United States, Germany, Japan. British factories were outdated, British management was complacent, British industry was dying. The best engineers emigrated. Capital flowed to America. Innovation happened elsewhere. Britain was importing more than it exported, running constant trade deficits, living beyond its means. They were consuming wealth created by others, sustained only by borrowing and the residual prestige of empire. Stage 6. Geopolitical fragmentation. After World War II, the empire unraveled fast. India gained independence in 1947, taking 389 million people with it. Burma, Ceylon, Palestine followed. By 1956, the illusion was shattered completely at Suez. Britain and France invaded Egypt to retake the Suez Canal. The United States forced them to withdraw. It was humiliating, a clear demonstration that Britain was no longer a superpower. They were a junior partner in America's world. The pound's reserve currency status collapsed. By 1950, the US dollar had replaced sterling as the global reserve. Countries around the world dumped their pound reserves. Britain faced repeated currency crises through the 1960s and 70s. Stage 7. Systemic collapse. Britain didn't cease to exist like the Soviet Union would later. But the empire was finished. By 1967, they devalued the pound by 14% in a single day. By 1976, they required an IMF bailout. The country that once ruled a quarter of the earth needed emergency loans to function. The collapse from dominant superpower to diminished regional power took 40 years. Half the time Spain took. And the pattern was identical. Now watch it happen even faster. The Soviet Union, 1945 to 1991. Same 7 stages. Completed in less than half a century. Stage 1. Peak power. After World War II, the Soviet Union was a legitimate superpower. They had defeated Nazi Germany. They controlled Eastern Europe. They had nuclear weapons, a space program, global influence. By 1970, the USSR had military alliances with 24 countries and supported communist movements on every continent. They believed their system was superior. They believed they would outlast capitalism. They were wrong. Stage 2. Imperial overreach. The Soviet Empire was massive and expensive, occupying Eastern Europe, supporting Cuba with $4 billion annually, backing Vietnam, Angola, Ethiopia, Nicaragua, Afghanistan. By 1980, the USSR had troops or advisors in 46 countries. The Afghan war alone cost $15 billion per year, roughly 10% of Soviet GDP. The arms race with the United States cost even more. The USSR was spending 15 to 17% of GDP on the military, compared to 6% for the United States. They couldn't afford it. But admitting that meant admitting the system didn't work. Stage 3. Currency debasement. The Soviet ruble was never a real currency. It was an internal accounting unit, non-convertible, backed by nothing. The government set prices by decree, ignoring supply and demand. But they still debased it. The money supply increased by 600% between 1960 and 1990, while production grew much slower. The result was repressed inflation. Goods disappeared from stores. Black markets flourished. Rubles lost purchasing power even though official prices stayed frozen. By 1990, the ruble was worthless outside the Soviet bloc. Even inside, people preferred dollars or barter. Stage 4. Debt spiral. The USSR borrowed from the West starting in the 1970s. By 1985, Soviet foreign debt was $31 billion. By 1989, it had grown to $54 billion. They borrowed to buy grain because Soviet agriculture had failed. They borrowed to buy technology because Soviet industry couldn't innovate. Debt service consumed hard currency earnings. The oil revenues that sustained the empire were increasingly dedicated to interest payments. Stage 5. Loss of productive capacity. Soviet economic growth was a lie. Official statistics claimed steady growth. Reality was stagnation and decline. By the 1980s, Soviet factories were producing goods nobody wanted. Technology was decades behind the West. The best scientists were restricted from international collaboration. Innovation had stopped. When Gorbachev allowed Soviet economists to recalculate GDP honestly, they discovered the economy had been shrinking since the 1970s. The USSR was consuming capital, not creating it. They were mining the past to sustain the present. Stage 6. Geopolitical fragmentation. Gorbachev tried to reform the system with glasnost and perestroika. He failed. Reforms exposed the system's weaknesses without creating alternatives. The satellite states broke free first. Poland's solidarity movement. Hungary opening its borders. The fall of the Berlin Wall in November 1989. By 1990, the Warsaw Pact was dissolving. The empire's outer layer was gone. Then the republics started leaving. Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia declared independence in 1990. The Union was fracturing. Stage 7. Systemic collapse. December 25, 1991. The Soviet Union ceased to exist. From superpower to 15 separate countries in less than 900 days. Not from invasion. From internal economic collapse. The system simply stopped working. The currency was worthless. The government was bankrupt. The promises couldn't be kept. The empire imploded. 7 stages. Completed in 46 years. Faster than Britain. Much faster than Spain. Now let me show you where the United States is in the same pattern. The United States, 1945 to present. Same pattern. Faster acceleration. Stage 1. The Golden Age. After World War II, America was untouchable. 50% of global GDP. The only major economy not destroyed by war. The Manhattan Project. The nuclear monopoly. The dollar backed by gold, accepted everywhere as the global reserve currency. That was peak America. 1945 to approximately 1971. Stage 2. Imperial overreach. Completed. The United States currently maintains approximately 750 military bases in 80 countries. Not 750 total facilities. 750 bases. Actual military installations with permanent personnel. The cost is classified, but estimates range from $150 billion to $250 billion annually just to maintain the overseas presence. Add the wars. Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, proxy wars in Yemen, Ukraine, military aid to Israel, Taiwan, dozens of others. Security guarantees to NATO, Japan, South Korea, Australia. By 2024, the U.S. defense budget is $842 billion officially. But that doesn't include veterans' benefits, nuclear weapons maintenance, or intelligence agencies. The real number exceeds $1.5 trillion. Nearly 6% of GDP spent on military commitments around the world. Spain and Britain made the same choice. Expand the empire beyond sustainable limits. It always ends the same way. Stage 3. Currency debasement. Completed. In 1971, Richard Nixon closed the gold window. Ended the Bretton Woods system. The dollar, once backed by gold at $35 per ounce, became a fiat currency backed by nothing but government decree. Since 1971, the Federal Reserve has increased the money supply by over 2,000%. M2 money supply in 1971 was $600 billion. By 2024, it exceeds $21 trillion. The result? A dollar today has 14% of the purchasing power of a $1,971. 86% loss of value in 53 years. That's debasement. Legal, official, systematic currency destruction. Spain mixed copper into silver. Britain left the gold standard. The United States printed dollars. Same pattern. Same result. Stage 4, debt spiral. Completed. U.S. national debt in 1980, $900 billion. U.S. national debt in 2000, $5.6 trillion. U.S. national debt in 2020, $27 trillion. U.S. national debt in 2024, $36 trillion. That's a 4,000% increase in 44 years. GDP increased by 800% in the same period. The debt is growing 5 times faster than the economy. And it's accelerating. The U.S. is adding $1 trillion in debt every 100 days. Interest payments on the national debt in 2024 exceed $1 trillion annually. That's more than the defense budget, more than Medicare. The United States is borrowing money to pay interest on previous borrowing. That's the debt spiral. Stage 4 completed. Stage 5, loss of productive capacity. In progress. Here's where we are right now. This is the current stage. In 1970, the United States produced 28% of global manufacturing output. By 2000, it was 22%. By 2020, it was 16.8%. China now produces 28.4% of global manufacturing. The workshop of the world has moved. The trade deficit tells the same story. The U.S. imports $3.1 trillion in goods annually. It exports $2.1 trillion. That's a $1 trillion trade deficit. Every year, the country is consuming more than it produces, sustained only by printing dollars and borrowing. But it gets worse. The best indicators of productive capacity are deteriorating. Infrastructure. The American Society of Civil Engineers gives U.S. infrastructure a C- grade. Roads, bridges, electrical grid, water systems. Decades of underinvestment. Education. U.S. students rank 36th globally in mathematics, 13th in reading. The pipeline for future engineers and scientists is weakening. R&D. In 1980, the U.S. conducted 37% of global research and development. By 2020, it was 27%. China is now at 26% and rising. Brain drain. For the first time since World War II, there are signs of reverse brain drain. Chinese and Indian engineers are returning home. The talent flow is reversing. These are the exact symptoms Britain showed in the 1920s and 30s. The real economy is hollowing out while the financial economy inflates. Manufacturing moves elsewhere. Innovation slows. The country becomes dependent on imports, sustained only by the privilege of printing the reserve currency. That privilege is temporary. Ask Britain. Which brings us to the stages we haven't completed yet. Stage 6, geopolitical fragmentation. Not yet completed, but visibly beginning. The dollar's reserve currency status is eroding. In 2000, 73% of global foreign exchange reserves were held in dollars. By 2024, it's 59% and falling. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are creating alternative payment systems. The mBridge project allows cross-border transactions without dollars. Over 30 countries are testing central bank digital currencies designed to bypass SWIFT and dollar settlement. China and Russia conduct bilateral trade in yuan and rubles. Saudi Arabia is accepting yuan for oil. The petrodollar system, established in 1974, is fracturing. U.S. allies are hedging. South Korea maintains trade with both the U.S. and China. European nations pursue independent relationships. The unquestioned allegiance of the Cold War era is gone. Stage 6 is underway. Not completed, but progressing. Stage 7, systemic collapse. Not yet. This is the future if the pattern continues. We've seen it 3 times. Spain took 80 years from stage 6 to stage 7. Britain took 30 years. The Soviet Union took 2 years. If the United States follows the pattern, if nothing changes, this is what stage 7 looks like. The dollar loses reserve currency status completely. Foreign holders of U.S. debt, China, Japan, and others, begin selling. Interest rates spike. The debt becomes unpayable. The government faces a choice between default or hyperinflation. The military presence overseas becomes unsustainable. Bases close. Commitments are abandoned. Allies fend for themselves. The unipolar moment ends. Domestically, the productive economy can't support the financial superstructure. The stock market, the bond market, the real estate market, all inflated by decades of printed money and low interest rates, all collapse simultaneously. It doesn't require invasion or war, just mathematics. The system consumes itself. The call to awareness, 18 minutes, 20 minutes. 3 empires, 3 collapses. The exact same 7-stage pattern every time. Spain completed all 7 stages. Britain completed all 7 stages. The Soviet Union completed all 7 stages. The United States has completed 5. Stage 1, Golden Age, completed 1945 to 1971. Stage 2, Imperial Overreach, completed and ongoing. Stage 3, Currency Debasement, completed in 1971, ongoing since. Stage 4, Debt Spiral, completed and accelerating. Stage 5, Loss of Productive Capacity, in progress right now. Stage 6, Geopolitical Fragmentation, beginning. Stage 7, Systemic Collapse, not yet. The pattern is clear. The trajectory is established. And if history is any guide, stages 6 and 7 happen faster than stages 1 through 5. Spain took 80 years to collapse. Britain took 40 years. The Soviet Union took less than a decade. The timeline is compressing because the modern world moves faster. Information travels instantly. Capital flows at the speed of light. Crises cascade globally in days, not decades. If the United States reaches stage 7, it won't take 80 years. It might not take 8 years. Now here's the important part. Patterns are not destiny. They're warning systems. The 7-stage collapse pattern happened 3 times because 3 empires made the same decisions. Those decisions were choices. Spain chose to fight wars on 4 continents while debasing their currency. Britain chose to maintain an empire they couldn't afford while borrowing beyond their means. The Soviet Union chose central planning and military spending over productive capacity. They all chose short-term survival over long-term sustainability. They all chose to believe they were different, that their empire was permanent, that the rules didn't apply to them. They were all wrong. The United States faces the same choice right now. Continue the pattern or break it. Continue imperial overreach or acknowledge limits. Continue currency debasement or restore monetary discipline. Continue debt spiral or confront fiscal reality. Continue loss of productive capacity or rebuild domestic manufacturing. The pattern says what happens if we do nothing. 3 complete examples, 3 identical outcomes. But here's what you need to understand. The collapse of a reserve currency empire doesn't just affect that empire. It affects the entire global system. When Spain collapsed, it destabilized Europe for a century. When Britain collapsed, it created the power vacuum that led to World War II. When the Soviet Union collapsed, it created regional chaos across Eurasia that persists today. If the United States completes the pattern, the consequences will be global. The dollar is the reserve currency for the entire world. $13 trillion in dollar-denominated debt exists outside the United States. The U.S. military provides security guarantees to over 50 countries. A stage 7 collapse wouldn't be isolated. It would cascade. That's not a prediction. That's the pattern speaking. 3 times before, empires that controlled the global system collapsed, and the entire system collapsed with them. So what do you do with this information? You recognize where we are in the pattern. Stage 5. Loss of productive capacity. The most dangerous stage because it's the last one that's reversible. After stage 5, the empire is consuming more than it produces, sustained only by financial engineering and the residual privilege of reserve currency status. That's unsustainable. The mathematics guarantee failure. But stage 5 can be stopped. Productive capacity can be rebuilt. Manufacturing can return. Real economic growth can resume. It requires political will, painful decisions, and abandoning the fantasy that printed money is wealth. It requires breaking the pattern. Spain didn't do it. Britain didn't do it. The Soviet Union didn't do it. The question is whether the United States will. The pattern says no. History says empires never voluntarily give up the short-term benefits of currency debasement and debt spending until collapse forces their hand. But patterns aren't laws. They're observations of repeated choices. This time could be different, if the choices are different. If not, then welcome to stage 6. It's coming faster than anyone wants to admit. The pattern doesn't lie. It's completed 3 times. And right now, we're following the same script, decision by decision, stage by stage. For those willing to look, the evidence is undeniable. The question is what you do with that knowledge.